Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, we know that paralysis can take on many forms. It can be physical like mine, or it can be psychological.
Anything you put your mind to.
And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose.
What seems impossible can be done by you.
Today, we're traveling all the way to Ireland. I am so excited to have Paul Davis with us today.
It may knock you down, but don't let it stop you.
He advises businesses and people on how to become their best self and how to manifest the person that they were born to be.
How would a child approach life? And if you look at young kids, whether it be, in around the age of 7, they have this expectancy in life. They have this excitement about life. They have this questioning about life. It's like every day is like Christmas Day to them, and everything's so exciting and everything is possible. Nothing is impossible. It's just phenomenal. That's the kind of approach that we need to have to life in every single day. I use the analogy of, life is a bit like the Snakes and Ladders board game, or I think in America they call it Chutes and Ladders, whereby that's what life is like. Sometimes you'll go up the ladders and other times you'll go down the chutes. That's what life is all about. But have fun.
Got so much to give, a lot of life to live. You must go from paralysis to purpose.
Get your pen and paper out.
Yeah,
I'm taking notes.
Paralysis to purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks, and I say this all the time. I get so excited about this job that I have. And today, we're traveling all the way to Ireland, and we're going to be talking to someone really inspirational and who has impacted literally hundreds of thousands of lives all over the world. And so we're excited to do that. But before we talk to our guest today, if you are a first-time listener, let me welcome you to the podcast. And if you're a returner, thank you for coming back. Make sure that you share this podcast, like this podcast, and please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing on the podcast. As I mentioned, our guest today, he's got a really long resume. And so we're not going to be able to get through it all. But let me just tell you a couple of things about him. He is an advisor, and he advises businesses and people on how to become their best self and how to manifest the person that they were born to be. That's on his website, and that's a different way of describing coaching. And he does that. He's an author. He's an international bestseller. He works on the Irish Stock Exchange. He does a lot of stuff. If you see in his office, he's got all kind of deal toys back there. Successful businessman. I am so excited to have Paul Davis with us today, all the way from Ireland. So, Paul, welcome to the podcast.
I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, David. You've no idea how thrilled I am to be here.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, hey, we're excited. Now, what part of Ireland are you from?
I'm on the east coast of Ireland. So I live in a place called Dublin, which is the capital of Ireland. Okay. So as you know, Ireland's quite small. But yeah, I'm on the east coast, so in a place called Blackrock, which is right on the coast. Most places where people travel to, when they're coming as a tourist to Ireland, they'll normally go on the west coast. Okay. So they'll fly in probably to Dublin, and one of the obligatory things that you need to have is you need to have a pint of Guinness. And then once you've had the pint of Guinness, you've got to write a passage then to travel around the rest of Ireland. And it's on the west coast, which is the scenery is just absolutely phenomenal.
Let's get started, because the work that you do is amazing. He has a book out that I read. It's called Evolve. It was published in 2012, which is already 9 years ago. And I know he's starting working on another book. But this book was remarkable in the sense that I've read a number of books about coaching and life coaching and helping executives and businesses thrive. This book was really full of knowledge and things that you could actually apply from the beginning to the end. And so we're going to talk about his book some today. But before we do that, I want to talk about him. And he was the 7th child of 7 in his family. And there's a folklore, an Irish folklore that talks about special giftings and stuff that comes with being 7th of 7. Yeah, that's how you say it. And I want you to talk about the gifting that you had as a young child, because you were able to see beyond what you could actually see, literally. And that helped people shape their lives. And eventually that helped you in what you've done professionally. So talk about that as a child and when you really start to notice you had a gift.
Yeah, so it was quite obvious when I was growing up, because so to explain the folklore for our listeners, I was born the 7th son, and being the 7th son in Ireland, you would typically have it's associated with being gifted, and normally in the healing side of things. Now, when I was writing the book, I understood that I was the 7th son of a 7th child, and that's what I put in the book. But then I had never shared the manuscript of the book with anybody in my family. So when the book was eventually published in 2012, and my mum read it, she pulled me aside and said, "Paul, you're not only the 7th son, but you're also the 7th son of a 7th child of a 7th child." So there's actually 3 generations of being the 7th child. So being a 7th son means that typically it's the 7th son of a 7th, which will have healing gifts. And there's different ways that my brothers would attest to me in respect of having that healing gift. And normally when in Ireland, people will use that healing from, to do with, whether it be cattle, whether it be animals. But for me, it was actually healing people. So as a child, a really young child, probably up until about age 10, people would come to the house and I would do a healing session for them. So, and people would come with, whether it be cancer, rheumatism, migraines, you name it, there'd be all sorts of different ailments that they would come with. And I would just do a healing with them, and they would go away and be thrilled with the healing and get amazing results from it as well. And no matter where I went, so I remember on one occasion we were on a campsite, and we were in a caravan at the time on this particular campsite, and I was being brought to another caravan because the lady in that caravan had cancer. And I could see, and again, I was really, really young, but I remember she didn't have any hair, and she was in quite an advanced stage of cancer, and I was asked to do a healing for her. So that was my introduction as a kid. But then when it came to kind of in around my early teens, it wasn't really that cool to be doing healing. And I kind of rebelled against it. And again, when it comes to healing, there is this association whereby, and you'll find this for a lot of people that work in the gifted side of things, whereby because it's a God-given gift, well then you shouldn't receive any compensation for it in terms of money or gifts and so on. So these people would come to the house and I'd do a healing for them, and they'd want to give me money or a toy or whatever it might be. And my mum wouldn't allow anything in exchange for it. So, you can imagine what it was like being a teenager saying, I want something for the work that I'm doing. So I kind of just rebelled against it, and I moved away from it, to be honest. And I just went through the rest of my life in kind of early teens, build my career, doing what I thought everybody else was doing or could do. But it wasn't until kind of later on that when I met different people over the years, I kind of realized actually not everybody could do what I could do. And what I mean by that was that, so apart from the healing side, the healing was kind of, it was my first flag to say, well, no, there's something different about you, Paul. And there's a whole different story as regards how I actually ended up being the 7th son as well. But what I found was that I was getting images and knowings and insights for different people that I would come across. And when I originally trained as an accountant. So I come from a very logical kind of brain perspective, and everything has to have a process and a system, and everything has to make sense. But there was this other side of me, and saying, I'm getting these images and knowings and insights for people, and I'd lead them on to what I would consider what was the right path for them, what was going to bring them the most success. So when I was going into companies and turning them around, So I became, for one better word, known as a really, really good business consultant. I'd go into a companies that were suffering financially and are not doing that well. And I'd turn them around very, very quickly. And part of that was I'd know what will be the best success for the company or for the business owners. And a lot of the time when I was working with people, and I'd go anywhere, and then all of a sudden I'd find somebody would come up to me and just start a conversation. And I'd end up, for one better word, counseling them or giving advice as regards what they should do in their life and so on. And, these people would turn around and say, I've never told anybody in my whole life what I've just told you in the last 15 minutes. So whatever the connection was, and I didn't really know at the time. I was still, nobody taught me, nobody kind of instructed me as regards what to do. So I just had to kind of figure it out for myself. And on the flip side of that, while it sounds really great, the flip side is that there is a shadow side, there is a dark side. Because while I could tell people what their purpose was and what they were to do in life and how they could be successful and how they could reach their full potential and ultimately what they're here to fulfill, what their purpose is and what the intention is behind that, I absolutely wished and desired for somebody to come to me and say, Paul, this is what you're to do. So that came for a lot of, I battled with suicide for quite a number of years. For me, it goes back to the age of 10. So that was my shadow side, and that search and that pursuit for there has to be purpose, there has to be meaning in this life, brought me on a lot of different paths, a lot of different avenues, for one better word. And it wasn't until I got my own download or my own insight, and I distinctly remember to this day. And that insight and that download was, Paul, your purpose is to put people on their purpose. So nobody could tell me what my purpose was because that's what I do. So a lot of things that my clients would tell me would be, Paul, you're just making this up. Because I would tell them things that were going to happen and different things that they should look out for. And the ones that kind of listened to what I was saying were the ones that did really, really well. And then the ones that didn't, and the events happened and so on, they'd ring me up 6 months later and say, Paul, geez, I should have listened to you. I never did. Here's what's actually now after happening and so on. Wow. So, from clients coming to me and saying, look, Paul, you're just making it up. And also for my logical head and my system head, my accountant's head, for want of a better word, I needed a system. I needed proof for myself that what I was receiving and passing on to people was, for want of a better word, was real. So I spent an awful lot of years researching. I debunk an awful lot of what people say online and in books about life purpose, because I know it to be incorrect. So what I've been doing for many years is actually develop a methodology in order to substantiate my knowings and my insights and the visions that I get for clients, and to try and bring them through a methodology whereby they can actually see it for themselves and see the evidence in their life. And then when they do, now they can accept it a little bit more. And now I no longer, thank God, get the comments and sense of, Paul, you're just making it up, because now it makes sense for them. And that's my primary function right now at the moment is literally, I've a big mission that I want to fulfill, and I want to reach. I have a big number of people, but I want to reach as many people as I possibly can in the world to put them on the right track, because I know the difference for them and I know what they're to do. And that's when I see God at work, it's just absolutely phenomenal. The perfection of everything is just phenomenal, and that's what I absolutely love doing every single day.
You gave us a lot. So you were involved in, you had a healing ministry as a child, and that was one of the first manifestations of these giftings that you had. And people would come to your home, and you would pray for them or touch them or whatever your process was, and they would leave healed. And you said that as you became a teenager, you kind of became uncomfortable with that. I find that interesting, because you were really helping people, but I think the message in that is that you needed some covering, you needed some training, someone to to help you to understand the gift. Is that one of the reasons why you do what you do now professionally?
It's part of it. I gave it up partly because it was never really fully explained. And when you're age 10, you know, and you're not told what's actually happening, what you're doing, and everything seems weird. So therefore, you know, I do a healing, but I never really knew what I was supposed to do, for want of a better word. So yeah, I would do hands-on healing. I would kind of say that prayer in my own mind with an intention behind it for the person to be healed and be better and so on, and to see them in their purest form. But I didn't have any coaching. I didn't have any teacher to explain what was actually doing. So therefore, you know, when your friends are out playing and you're inside doing healing, you're kind of saying, you know, I couldn't make sense of it, to be honest with David.
Yeah, and trying to find a balance. As a teenager with this fantastic gift that you didn't ask for, you were given, and now you've got this conflict between I'm doing this good work or whatever this is over here, and I want to go play basketball or hang out with the fellas, and you didn't have anyone to help you with that.
And the other side, you want to fit in as well. So you don't want to be too different. So yeah,
you want to fit in, and helping people recover from cancer and paralysis is not something that everybody does. It's needed, but it's not what everybody does. And then the other thing you mentioned was the dark side, and how it's interesting how you had this thing that was so positive and helping so many people, but you were struggling with your own identity and trying to figure out your own purpose. It's interesting. You were fulfilling a purpose, but at the time you didn't know it. What was that struggle like for you to really not be sure about what to do, and then to the point of where you were thinking about committing suicide?
Bottom line is, I just did not want to be here. Absolutely. And anybody that hasn't contemplated or thought or even planned or even considered suicide will never get that. And they just won't. It's so difficult to connect with. But I literally just did not want to be here, because let me just elaborate on some of the gifts. One is the healing side of things, but also I'm an empath and I'm also an intuitive. So being an empath, I get to feel at a much, much deeper level what a person is feeling. And I say myself in sense of it's at a soul level of what that person is feeling. So even though somebody might wear a mask or they put on a persona that everything's great and everything's happy and so on, I get to feel what that person is really feeling inside. So if you can imagine when you're picking that up from other people that are around you, that's actually quite overwhelming. When you're then adding on to that from an intuitive perspective, and you're picking up an awful lot more information and some information you don't really want to get, but you don't have any control over, it's quite difficult to deal with. But I absolutely, looking at it now, I can absolutely say, do you know what? I wouldn't wish anybody to go through it. However, I can completely understand why I have to go through, and for want of a better word, bear that cross. Mm-hmm. Because if I didn't, and I didn't know what it was like for somebody to contemplate, plan, and even attempt suicide, I wouldn't know what it would be like for other people. And second of all, it wouldn't have given me the impetus to do all the research and the knowledge. Like I've been around the world in learning from all the best mentors that I can possibly learn from and so on, and researching for my own knowledge and own understanding of the underlying causes of depression and suicide and so on. If I didn't have that cross to bear, well, then I would never do any of that research. And for a lot of people that come to me, and I'd have individuals that would be considered as being highly successful. I mean, they have all the money, all the cars, all the houses, all the, everything that anybody could possibly wish for in their lifetime. But they will come to me and say, Paul, I just don't want to be here. And when I talk to them in my definition or my understanding of depression and suicide ideation, and I give them the reasons why and so on, they know they know I know, if that makes sense. I'm not like anybody else. I haven't read it from a textbook. I don't come from theory. I know what, and hence the reason why I go, when people talk about depression, suicide, and I personally, I don't like the term mental health. I prefer mental fitness. When people talk along those terms, all what's spread from a common perspective, in the sense of what you'll hear is, look, you got to exercise, you got to eat healthily, you've got to, reduce your alcohol content and so on. That's a sticky plaster. I go much, much deeper. And when I give a definition of suicide and depression to my clients, they completely get it, because now that makes complete sense to them. And the same thing applies when it comes to life purpose. I go against nearly every single thing that's said about life purpose. And when I say it to my clients that come to me, say, yeah, I've been searching for years for my life purpose, and what you've just said in the space of 5 minutes completely, totally, and utterly makes sense.
Wow.
And that's the reason why they haven't found it.
Well, I had no idea about the thoughts of suicide, because that wasn't in the book or anything I read about you. But that's, and thank you for sharing that, because that is a real, it's a real issue. And for you, though, it was part of your development in terms of the depth of what you would do and eventually impact other people's lives with. That's remarkable. Before we started recording, what we were talking about, what a gift that is to have. But you did say there's a cost that comes with these things. And so often I think we are looking at other people's lives and say, man, I would love to be in their position, or love to be, where they are, but we don't know what they've actually been through to get to what they have right now. And part of your story as well. Let's move forward a little bit, because we could talk about that for another 35 minutes. But you were able to kind of harness this gift and figure out how to use it and what it was for. And it's interesting. You talk about purpose, and one of the things I love to speak on is purpose as well. And I don't have the giftings necessarily that you have, but I've also believed, though, much like you, that your purpose is within you, and it is downloaded, and you just need to be able to find that. In your book, you talk about the importance of having a spiritual component in your process of becoming the manifested person you're supposed to be. Can you just talk about why having some sort of relationship, as you call it in your book, with a higher power is important, and how that impacts your understanding of purpose?
I think it becomes from the perspective of you're here for so much more greater. So let me explain that. I've identified 12 different states of what I call states of being. Okay, and 5 of those states start off with despair, hope, belief, knowing, and mastery. So despair is quite obvious, and there's quite a number of people that would have experienced the state of despair. And when you move from the state of despair into the state of hope, it's you're looking towards the future. There's something ahead, and that's where you're a little bit more planning. And then you move into the state of belief. And state of belief is where people's definition of ego, our personality, comes into play, whereby now we're a little bit more confident about what we can achieve. We're fully out there. We absolutely believe in the amount of success that we can actually have. We totally are confident about our abilities, what we can achieve and what we can do. And that's in the state of belief. It's all about us. But things happen in the universe. And what happens between the state of belief and what I call the state of knowing is what I call the threshold line. And it's that threshold line that people will be, for one better word, tapped on the shoulder and say, you've got to step over. And when you move into the state of knowing, it's now no longer about you, it's actually about everybody else. And it becomes more about what's the impact that you want to make, what's the difference you want to make in this world. And a lot of people, so there's a few different states in between the state of belief and the state of knowing. But within that, people will go on this journey of seeking knowledge and seeking wisdom and seeking information and finding about who are they actually. And a lot of people, what they do is they'll either go for, work with a spiritual teacher. They'll go to all different places around the world, Machu Picchu or whatever, to try and find themselves, which you don't. Everything's within yourself. So within that tap on the shoulder is God. It's the universe. It's higher power. It's whatever terminology that people feel comfortable with. And can many people live a life without a spiritual connection? Yeah, they absolutely can. Are they missing something? Hugely, absolutely. I have zero doubt, absolute zero doubt that there's a higher energy. I've no doubt whatsoever in my mind, because there's so many circumstances, and I've seen so many different things, and I've seen the perfection of how the universe works, how God works. And I use the analogy of the feather, the brick, and the truck. And what I mean by that is that there's nudges that we will get from the universe or your unconscious, whichever way you want to look at it, whereby it's like the light touch of a feather, whereby somebody says something, or you're in a conversation, or you watch a movie, and something inside resonates, and it's calling you forward into something greater. But we ignore those feathers. And if we ignore the feathers, well, then the brick comes along. And in the book that you refer to, Evolve, I call myself the brick. And I know that because people find me in all different ways. And I quite strongly say, look, here's what your purpose is, here's what you need to be doing, and so on and so forth. And if you don't listen to me, well, the truck's going to come. So when that happens, well, then nobody wants the truck in their life, believe me. But when you're in a state of knowing, and you get to that, people will talk about having a spiritual awakening, or a moment in their life whereby the light is shone upon them. That's when they realize, actually, no, they're here for something greater. Mm. And that's why it is just so, for me, that spiritual connection is huge.
So it's somewhat complex, or maybe even difficult for a person to find that space or that purpose that's in them on their own. It sounds like you need a tap on the shoulder or someone or something to help you to get there. It's not something that you will probably find on your own. Is that what you're saying?
It's so difficult to find on your own. So difficult. Some people, let me put it this way, there was a book that was written by Napoleon Hill. And most people would know Napoleon Hill's book as being Think and Grow Rich. However, what they don't realize is that actually, no, he published another book, but it was published after his death. And that was Outwitting the Devil. That was the title of the book. Mm. And within that, Napoleon Hill talks like a conversation that he's having with the devil. And within that, he says that the devil says 2% of the population know what their purpose is and are fulfilling their purpose. That 2% of the population, I don't go near. The other 98% of the population, they don't know what their purpose is. And how I control them is through fear. Now, if we look back over the last 2 years in relation to the pandemic and any other recession that we've gone through, or any other thing that happens in people's lives, whether they're going through financial difficulty or a medical problem or whatever, fear shows up. Well, in Napoleon Hill's book, he talks about the devil controlling people through fear. So it's very difficult for people to know what their purpose is. But if I was to take the statistics from Napoleon Hill, well, then I would say 2% of the population know what the purpose is, and therefore they fulfill their purpose. Mm. The other 98% don't know, and it is actually very difficult for somebody to find out for themselves.
Wow. One last thing before we take a quick break. You talked about the importance of mental fitness, is what you called it. It's also known as mental health. I love that switch to mental fitness. Can you just really talk about, in your work, some of the challenges that you faced as you deal with people, and some of the inability to maybe get to that higher level of consciousness, and how you help people get there?
There is so much involved in it. So what I call, it's about awakening the genius within. And that genius is that spirit that you're born with. It's those innate abilities and those innate gifts. So what I talk about your genius pendulum, and everything I can bring back to your genius pendulum. So when somebody is out of equilibrium, well, then that's when other things will show up by way of fear, anxiety, depression, you name it, all the different things, all those feelings that people perceive as being negative. That's when your genius pendulum is out of equilibrium. So So a lot of the work that I do, and I do it through my community and when I work with clients on a one-to-one basis, is to bring that genius pendulum as much as possible into equilibrium. And that's where I talk about mental fitness. What we're constantly doing is removing all those things, those triggers, those emotional triggers, those anxieties, those fears that hold people back, and then maintain themselves within as much as possible within equilibrium. And then that's now how life becomes a little bit more effortless. And you're in line with your unconscious, and you're in line with, as you mentioned earlier on, that spiritual connection, that much, much higher connection.
You said the genius pendulum, and I love these. I love your language. And so in all of that, it sounds like you're saying that you can actually live a balanced life. And once you get to that place of balance, and we're not talking about how much you work and how much you play. We're just talking about psychologically and emotionally and mentally being balanced. From there, you can really begin your journey to understanding purpose.
Life becomes so much easier, and therefore for you to fulfill your purpose becomes so much easier. And that's where now you're working, the best way I can describe it, you're working hand in hand with the universe.
Wow.
Where some people may have said the term in the sense of, when you're in a state of flow, the state of flow is everything seems effortless, and time, space just disappears, and you're just completely in the zone. Well, imagine living your life like that for the majority of your time. That's in a state of equilibrium.
Wow. Well, this is a great place for us to take a quick break, because when we come back, we're going to try to get into his book some. Toward the end of his book, he gave some everyday success habits is actually the title of the chapter. And we want to walk through some of those things that would make a difference in the quality of your life, and probably the quality of the people that are around you as well. So we'll be right back on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, with our fantastic guest, Paul Davis, all the way from Ireland, right after this.
We hope you're enjoying Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Paralysis to Purpose for more updates. Also, check out David's website at davidcookspeaks.com to learn more about his mission and purchase his book, Getting Undressed, From Paralysis to Purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Again, I'm your host, David Cooks, along with Paul Davis, yes, all the way from Ireland. And what a great guest we have. We ended the last portion of the podcast talking about the importance of mental fitness and how that impacts our lives. And I want to, the very first time I met you, Paul, I remember one of the things you mentioned was, we've gotten purpose all wrong. We're going about finding purpose the wrong way. And I want to, in this segment of our podcast, talk a little bit about that, and then end it with giving some practical tips, some things that could help people to get to their purpose. So what are we doing wrong as we're trying to define and find purpose?
Every single human being has an overarching purpose. And the overarching purpose that we're here to fulfill is to be ourselves, meaning our genius self. If you go back to what I said earlier on in relation to genius, the genius is the spirit that you're born with. It's the spirit within you. It's your innate abilities and your innate gifts. So our overarching purpose in life is to be our genius self. It's to love, to experience, and to live life fully. Now, love, I cannot emphasize it enough, because when it comes to what I referred to earlier on, the genius pendulum, well, then love is that equilibrium point. When you're out of equilibrium, well, then now you're in judgment, either judgment of others or judgment of self.
Okay, let's stop right there, because you said something that's, we may need to just let that marinate and sit for a minute. So you talk about love is the foundation of all of this that you're talking about. And if you're not in love, you go into areas of judgment. Yeah. Why is that so dangerous? And why is that so easy for us to do? Because, let me raise my hand for those that are watching. I'm sure I've been guilty of doing that.
We all do it. We all do it. So think of it from this perspective. In order for think of your soul, and it depends on what your understanding of soul is, but just think of soul as being this, whereby all you know is unconditional love. That's all you know. And therefore, in order for you to experience anything different, you have to understand contrast. So we've heard the phrase before, or many people will have perhaps heard this phrase, whereby we're spiritual beings having a human experience. In order for that spiritual being, which is your soul, to have that experience, it's got to understand contrast. Oh, so what I mean by that is you don't know what hot feels like until such times you've felt cold. So that's contrast. So if all you know is love, well then how can you get to experience hatred, jealousy, or any of the other emotions that people want to feel? So when it comes to understand, so everybody will judge others and everybody will judge ourselves. It's just part of human nature. But our real lesson as part of living in this human experience is to understand love. So no matter what your circumstances are, and no matter how detriment things are for people, how can you have that sense of gratitude and that sense of love for everything in your life? And I mean everything in your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because when you get to experience that, that's when you truly, fully understand love. And if our overarching purpose in life is to be our genius self, but also to experience, to live life fully, to love, and to evolve, hence the reason why the title of my first book was Evolve. And when you get to the conclusion in the book, and I say in the conclusion, take the first 4 letters of evolve and reverse them, and they spell love, because that's literally what we're here to do, is to love. So love is the core of absolutely everything in life. And when we get to reach that point, well, then now we can see both sides, because there's always both sides. Now we can get to live a life that we're actually here and meant to live. Now, every single human being has an individual purpose and a unique purpose. You could say it's fingerprint specific, or I heard the term recently, soul print specific. And what a lot of people end up happening is they get to a point whereby they research online or in books and say, what is my purpose? What am I here to do? What's life all about? What's the meaning of life? So they're typically what people will search for. And what they'll find is that, they'll come across books or people talk about, well, find your passion. And if you find your passion, well, then that's what's going to lead to your purpose. Well, let me give our listeners a bit of an insight. The origin of the word passion comes from the Latin word pathy, which is to suffer. And anybody that understands Christianity, and they will understand in terms of the passion of Christ. The passion of Christ was persecution and suffering and the crucifixion of Christ. So passion is the origin of suffer. So when people search for their passion, they cannot find what they're passionate about, because what you want to understand is that things that you're passionate about are transient. So let me explain that. So behind me, you'll see different memorabilia and different aviation things and mementos and so on, because I'm passionate about trying every single different type of flight experience. So I've jumped out of an aircraft twice. I've flown a hot air balloon. I've flown a helicopter. I've flown a small aircraft. I've flown, a glider. All different types of modes of flight I've done. And one of the things I'm trying to plan for this year is to do a biplane wing walk. And then after that, it'll be on to, I want to go out into outer space. So there are things that I'm passionate about, but they've nothing absolutely whatsoever got to do with my purpose. So what you'll do is people will find their passion, they find out what they enjoy doing and so on, but it's not going to lead them to their purpose.
How important is serving others and fulfilling your purpose? Is it true? Because I say this all the time, and you can correct me today if I'm wrong. But I don't think you're in your purpose if you're not serving others. I think there's got to be something like that. Is that correct? How important is serving?
It becomes the number one. So let me explain. So where I go back and I explain what I've identified, the different states of being. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a state of belief, well, then it's always going to be about you. In a state of knowing, that's when you're moving into your more purposeful work. and therefore it's all about everybody else. It's never about you. So in the book Evolve, I said never chase the money, because once you put the money first, well then it's just not going to work. So there's two things. One is your purpose becomes about other people, and what you do for yourself, you do for others. So, and if you really understand and absolutely know who you truly are, you will recall the phrase from the Bible, which goes along the lines of what you do to me, you do to others, you do to yourself. Mm-hmm. Okay? So understanding your whole purpose becomes about other people, but I'm going to add another layer onto that, because your intention is the most critical piece in all of this. So let me explain that. If your intention in your own mind, or where your whole being is coming from, is about money or about trying to get one over on somebody else or whatever, that's where judgment is going to come into play. And that's where it will never succeed. But where your intention is, you want the absolute best for that other individual, or whether it be your clients, your customers, or whatever, that's where your intention needs to be. And that's where your intention holds. Because now your whole being is about, you want the best for the people that you're working for.
So your intentions matter. And it's got to come from a pure place of service and really wanting to make other people's lives better. You talked about success habits in the end of your book in the last chapter, and there were a lot of them. You talked about focusing on one thing, take time out of each day to reflect and kind of see where you are and that type of stuff. Of all the things that you talked about, there was some that stood out to me. One was have fun. Why would you have to put in a book to tell people to have fun?
It's funny, isn't it? Excuse the fun. Life is a game, and honestly, when you play life like a game, like the way you used to play as a kid, now you'll see life in a completely different way. Now, that paragraph or that section in the book where I say have fun, that came from a download. That download was literally, the message was, Paul, they need to know how to have fun. And the bottom line is, the more you approach life from a fun, don't think of it as being fun. Think of it as being, how would a child approach life? And if you look at young kids, whether it be, in around the age of 7, they have this expectancy in life. They have this excitement about life. They have this questioning about life. It's like every day is like Christmas Day to them, and everything's so exciting, and everything is possible. Nothing is impossible. It's just phenomenal. That's the kind of approach that we need to have to life in every single day, because it's with that expectancy. Because we're not here to, yes, there's part of suffering, but when we turn it from the perspective of, well, yeah, but let's take what we have, but how can we actually make it a little bit more exciting for ourselves? How can we enjoy life? Because I use the analogy of, life is a bit like the Snakes and Ladders board game, or I think in America they call it Chutes and Ladders, whereby that's what life is like. Sometimes you'll go up the ladders and other times you'll go down the chutes. That's what life is all about. But people try and get to the square 100 as quickly as possible and rush through life and forget about all the different things that they get to go through. And life is just a game. That's all it is. Wow. Just have fun.
You talked about practicing forgiveness. And I'm going to take it to forgiving others and forgiving yourself.
Yeah.
Talk about that in terms of one of your success habits.
It's probably evolved a little bit more now since I wrote the book. People think of being forgiveness as being, so first of all, people will be familiar with the term of, if you're holding on to anger or resentment, and if you think of anger or resentment a bit like a hot coal, and you've got that hot coal in your hand, the only one that's hurting is yourself, not the other person. And I've come across so many different circumstances in my own life where I've had to let go of different things that I was holding on to. And it's not about forgiveness from the perspective of that you're better than somebody else and therefore you should forgive them. And that's coming from an element of judgment in the sense of I'm better than you. Forgiveness for me is actually seeing the perfection in what's actually happened. And then now you can come to a place of love. And that's very, very different. And when you come to a place of love, now it doesn't necessarily become about forgiveness. It's actually just an understanding of the perfection in seeing the both sides of that moment in our life where we've been holding that resentment or that anger or whatever the negative feeling that we've been holding. And then once you can release that, it becomes so much more phenomenal. And therefore you're not carrying that anger, that resentment, that baggage around with us for the rest of your life. You can let it go very, very quickly.
Is it fair for me to say that one of your gifts and one of the things that we all need to work on is finding the good in things and using that as the place where we start? Is that part of what you're saying? Because when you talked about forgiveness, you went right into that which was good. And normally when you think of forgiveness, you're thinking about, I got to forget something bad. I got to forgive him because that was a bad thing. To hear that forgiveness starts at a place where there's good is very interesting. Can you just talk about that a little bit more?
Your human brain will naturally go to what's been done wrong to me or what's been bad. And so therefore, again, let me bring you back to the genius pendulum. You're seeing one side of your life. You're seeing one view, but there's always two sides. And therefore, when you bring your mind into seeing the other side, what's been good in your life or how has it actually served you in fulfilling your purpose? So if I look at my suicide ideation, my planning, my attempting, and all kinds of things over the years, I could look at all the bad side of that. But however, how has that actually served me in my purpose? And it's been phenomenal in so many other ways. So therefore, it's looking at that side, and now you're bringing it more into objectivity or more into equilibrium. And now you're saying, there's the bad side or the dark side, there's the shadow side, but there's also the good side as well. And when you get to that point, now you can say, well, actually, do you know what? It's neither good nor bad. It just is.
So we're going to talk about one more thing probably here. And that is living in a place of gratitude.
Oh, yeah.
Because you just mentioned about how all these things that you've been through have served you.
Yeah.
You turned it around, and instead of them harming you, they have served you into becoming the person you are now. Why is it so important to stay in a place of gratitude?
Because when you understand love, you understand gratitude. So what I mean by that, a lot of people find difficulty in, they listen to this and say, Paul, how on earth could I see how the circumstances in my life have served me and so on? But when you start to go through it and work through it, you'll find the answers. So gratitude for me is opening that connection with that higher power, that higher mind, that universe, that God. And I want to explain a couple of things here, because people will hear about gratitude and they'll do different gratitude exercises. And what you'll typically hear from different gurus around the world is, do your gratitude exercise in the morning, do it in the evening time, and so on. But then what it becomes is you might as well, from my perspective, you might as well just make out a list of your shopping, as in your groceries of what you're going to buy, because that's how people are approaching it. And people even approach prayer, because I've observed, even my own parents and different people in the world in terms of how they pray. And they say the prayer, but they rush through it as quickly as possible. But at gratitude, they approach gratitude exactly the same way. Having a state of gratitude is being grateful. Just as much as when you're praying, it's being prayerful. It's not just for the sake of prayer. So prayers are very much for me like gratitude. It's a state of that you get into. So therefore, you're grateful throughout your whole day, not just in the morning when you're doing your exercise or in the evening time when you're writing them out again. There's a really great book that I came across a number of years ago, and it was written by a lady by the name of Corrie ten Boom. Now, Corrie ten Boom, the name of the book is The Hiding Place. and she survived a Holocaust in World War II. And in the start of the book, she explains a situation whereby her sister tells her, just be grateful for what you have. And she's arguing with her sister, saying, how on earth can I be grateful for the situation I'm in? There's rats, there's infestation, we're in this small little tiny little hovel of a place, and we have to share this our room with so many other women and so on. And it wasn't until later on in the book she actually understood the reasons why she had to be grateful in that moment. And for her, it was about, she realized that all those things were preventing the guards coming into the room. And by preventing the guards coming into the room, they could actually read the scripture in order to hold on to that moment of mindfulness, or that moment of getting through what they had to get through. That's been grateful for. So when I'm talking about gratitude, it's been grateful for both the good and the bad in our lives. And that's true gratefulness. That's true love.
Well, let me just ask one more question. One more, because you talked about mindfulness, and that's like the new buzzword and everything, and which is so interesting to me, because I think if you're mindful, you're just you should be kind. It's a mindset of kindfulness, and that becomes mindful. What would you say the role of reflection and meditation, and you talked about taking out moments in your day. How important is that in creating these spaces that you've talked about, gratitude and forgiveness and other things? And what practically does that mean?
Depends on how easy do you want your life to be. So let me explain that. So when I talk about the genius pendulum, I talk about the connection between the executive center part of your brain. So let's bring back to logic. I talk about the executive center part of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, which commands objectivity, planning, creativity, innovation. That's what the purpose of the executive center part of the brain is. And what in the executive code, which is what I call the methodology I bring people through, in the executive code, it's about connecting the executive center part of your brain with your unconscious and then with the superconscious. The superconscious is what, again, will be referred to as the universe, higher power, higher mind, God, infinite. So meditation is one of the practices that allows or deepens or opens the channel, for one of a word, between your executive center, the unconscious, and the superconscious. So if you want to have an easier life and know what you should do next, what I talk about, inspired thoughts, well then meditation is the gateway to receiving more inspired thoughts. So one of my gifts is being intuitive. Mm-hmm. Every single individual is intuitive. They just don't use their intuitive aspect. And therefore meditation allows that door to be opened to be more intuitive. And intuition, if you want to look at it from this perspective, is getting the information that your unconscious is processing, but your unconscious is connected, for want of a better word, it's connected to the universe, which is higher power, higher mind, higher God. It's all of those. And therefore, if you want to control your life based on your unconscious thinking, well, then you're literally limiting your life and what possibilities can actually show up, as opposed to working with that flow with the universe. And now you're open and connected with infinite possibilities. With God, all things are possible.
Mm-hmm. I get it. I heard you loud and clear.
Yeah.
That, there should not be a ceiling on you as an individual, but you can place one there if you limit it to what you know, believe, and see, and you don't tap into something deeper. Got it. Understood. Okay. Now, we always talk about three things on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. We talk about the importance of perspective, perseverance, and partnerships in helping us go from a journey of paralysis to purpose. And we talked about some of the area of paralysis today. You talked about mentally and emotionally and some of the things where people can get stuck. And you do a great job of taking them on that journey to their purpose. When you hear the word perspective, what comes to mind to you as you lead people from paralysis to purpose?
Law of duality. Immediately what comes into mind. Because people's perspective is they will see one-sided of something. And when you understand the law of duality, is the universal law of duality, there's always both sides. So when you force, for want of a better word, if you force your conscious thinking into seeing the other side, now you're going to be more objective. And then that's where you can get to the point of love.
And that perspective that you're talking about prevents you from becoming judgmental.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Perseverance.
My theme for this year is momentum. So momentum for me is keep going forward, keep taking action. Perseverance is absolute in every single thing, because, think of it this way. In my mind, immediately what comes to mind is that, a dripping tap will always fill the bucket. If you look at a waterfall and the rocks that are underneath at the bottom of the waterfall, and the waterfall's been pouring for decades, and you can literally see the impact of the waterfall on those rocks below. That's what perseverance is. You just keep going. I could have given up, and believe me, I came to many brink, and I could have given up many times, planned it many times. But on the other side, there was something inside of me that said, Paul, you've got to keep going. There's an answer to this. You've got to find that answer. And that's what drove me in order literally to do the research that I've done over the years to find that answer. That's perseverance.
A dripping faucet fills the bucket. I love it. And lastly, partnerships. How important are they on that journey?
It comes back to asking for help. So some people will come into your life for short moments in your life, and some people will come into long periods. I'm married now 30 years to my wife, and that's the most amazing partnership that I have, apart from my partnership with a higher being or a higher God. But there's other people. Think of partnerships from the perspective of it's who are the people that you can collaborate with for something much greater. And therefore they're the people you need to reach out to. And in some respects you could say it as being asking for help, but actually not, because you can make a much greater impact. It's collaboration.
Fantastic. Well, I'm gonna give you the last minute on the podcast. If there's anything that you would love to leave the listener with, I mean, you've given us all these nuggets, but what else would you love to say on the way out?
I have to try and avoid getting emotional here in this one, but what comes to mind for me is knowing your true life purpose is the single most powerful way to reach your full potential. If anybody's listened to this, apart from we've covered a lot of different topics just in this short space of time, David. I've lost two brothers. My first brother was, age 53, sorry. I was 43 at the time. My second brother was 56. He passed away on the 1st of September, just gone. They're young ages. And there's also many people that have come across over the years that also passed away on a very young age. Do you really want to get to the end of your life and look back with regrets? And, every day is just, everybody's given 24 hours every single day. You never know when those 24 hours are going to run out. You never know when those days are going to run out. So for me, it's, if I was to leave a message without trying to get emotional, it's how much do you want to suck out of life, and how many days do you literally want to be here to make a difference and make an impact? Make the most of it.
It's a powerful statement, and it's a great question to ask. It's one that everyone can ask. But Paul, if people would like to get a hold of you, follow you, be in contact with you, what's the best ways for them to reach you?
The easy way is just go to my website, which is www.paulwilliamdavis.com. Everything's there. My podcasts there, my books are there, my online community is there. All the different ways of getting in contact with me or find out what your purpose is and so on. Everything's there on my website. So that's the easy way, paulwilliamdavis.com.
Well, Paul, let me tell you, this has been great. I have loved every moment of this. And, I have a feeling we may do another podcast and pick up some more pieces, because there's a lot more to talk about with the work that you do. We didn't even really talk about turning businesses around. Today, I wanted to at least talk about people and how we can help people and help them become better versions of themselves, not better versions, but the only version of themselves they're supposed to be. That's really what we hope. Hopefully we got some of that done today. So again, thank you for that. And until next time, this is David Cooks on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, reminding you that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
All of us, we have some odds that, are stacked against us, or some hurdles that we have to jump. There's some people that have probably looked at you and counted you out and, laughed and felt like, okay, this is it for you. Like, just really didn't expect you to become anything because of what you've gone through.
Next time on Paralysis to Purpose.
So get ready for your comeback. Might break down, but you gon' bounce back.
Mario J. Brown is in the house.
And so Bounce Back is just a song that really speaks to getting over those, like, against all odds. Everybody we know has gone through some odds, and that bounce back is real, man. We can't give up. So against all odds, if we hang in there, the song says you're not gonna lose. Every tear you cry is making you. So get ready for your comeback. You might break down, but you're gonna bounce back.
Paralysis to purpose.